الرحمن الرحيم أولم يروا إلى الأرض كم أنبتنا فيها من كل زوج كريم إن في ذلك لآية وما كان أكثرهم مؤمنين وإن ربك لهو العزيز الرحيم وإذ نادى ربك موسى أن ائت القوم الظالمين قوم فرعون ألا يتقون قال ربي إني أخاف أن يكذبون ويضيق صدري ولا ينطلق لساني فأرسل إلى هارون ولهم علي ذنب فأخاف أن يقتلون قال كلا فاذهبا بآياتنا إنا معكم مستمعون فأتيا فرعون فقولا إنا رسول رب العالمين أن أرسل معنا بني إسرائيل قال ألم نربك فينا وليدا ولبثت فينا من عمرك سنين وفعلت فعلتك التي فعلت وأنت من الكافرين قال فعلتها إذا وأنا من الضالين ففررت منكم لما خفتكم فوهب لي ربي حكما وجعلني من المرسلين صدق الله العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد
أفلح من صلى على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وصلى الله على سيدنا ونبينا حبيب قلوبنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. Peace be upon Hussein alayhi salam, upon Ali son of Hussein, upon the children of Hussein, and upon the companions of Hussein. Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters, wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We would like to send our sincerest of condolences to the Imam of our time, Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman, Imam al-Mahdi, ajalallahu ta'ala faraj al-Sharif, on the martyrdom of his grandfather, Abu Abdullah al-Hussein. Our respected scholar and dear families, we welcome you all to the 10th night majalis of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam. Before we begin, inshallah, let us reflect on the profound wisdom, shared by our revered Imams alayhim salam. Imam Musa al-Kadhim reminds us through the words recorded by Sheikh Sudduq radwanullah ta'ala alayh, one who doubts about four things has denied everything revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. One of these being the wisdom and knowledge of the Imam of their time. Furthermore, the words of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam resonate deeply within us. Await for their appearance and do not despair of divine mercy. Because the best deed in the eyes of Allah, the Great and Mighty, is to wait for their reappearance. It is the duty of those who are believers. This highlights that the act of waiting with hope and steadfastness is considered one of the greatest deeds in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, we're talking about the appearance of our Imam, al-Mahdi, ajalallahu ta'ala faraj al-sharif. Over the past days, we have learned about many significant personalities whose lives and sacrifices have left an indelible mark on our faith and history, whose center was actively helping the Imam of their time. Waiting for the reappearance of our Imam isn't a passive act. It is a dynamic form of worship that involves preparing oneself spiritually, morally, and socially. It is about nurturing a state of readiness and fostering a community built on compassion, justice, and faith. Now please help me welcome Sayyid Ali Musawi with a loud salawat ala Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad.
أعوذ بالله من شر الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا أبي القاسم محمد وأهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين. اللهم صل وآل محمد. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Over the past 10 nights, we have gathered in majalises just like this one, and we have remembered the sacrifice of Imam Hussein. We've shed many tears, we've spent time in reflection, thinking about the story of Karbala. And one of the questions that I am sure has come up for each and every one of us, and this is a theme which is repeated every single year, and we reflect upon it and we think about it every single year, is that if I had been alive 1400 years ago, would I have been with my Imam? Because when we look at the time of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, what we find is that, in essence, the believers, or rather the Muslims, were split into three distinct groups. The first group were, of course, those that join the Imam and they go to the very ends of the earth for him. They are those that we are commemorating 1400 years later today. The second group is, of course, those that stood against the Imam. That the glitter of dunya, the things of this world, the love of wealth, the love of position, all of those things, it pulled them and it gave them the ability to stand against the Imam and to even go as far as to kill him. But what I'm really concerned about tonight is a third group. That in between those that were from the elite soldiers of the Imam, the companions of the Imam, and those that were from the utmost enemies of the Ahlul Bayt, there was a very large group, much larger than the first and much larger than the second, of individuals that they had love for the Ahlul Bayt. They loved Imam Hussein. But when they saw that there was danger, when they saw that the situation was becoming severe, they decided to sit the situation out. They said that inshallah, even though we have love for Imam Hussein alayhi salam, even though we don't want anything bad to happen for him, but this situation has become dangerous. We're at risk of losing all of the things that we have worked so hard for. And so they closed their eyes, they turned their faces, and they decided that we are going to ignore this whole situation. We're going to sit in our houses and hope for the best. The question that comes for me today is this question that 1400 years ago, if I had been alive in the current state that I am in, which of these groups would I have joined? Inshallah, tonight, I wanted to open this issue up. And I wanted to move into a slightly different discussion that as we commemorate Imam Hussein, and we have many other commemorations throughout the year, it's sometimes easy for us to forget that we have our own Imam. An Imam that is alive today. He walks amongst us. And yet we are not able to see him. What is our duty towards this Imam today? Even though 1400 years have passed, we're not able to join the Imam of years past, but are we able to join the Imam of today? This is one of the most important of questions. One of the things that has been asked of us for those who will be alive during the time of the occultation, during the time when the Imam is in a state of hiding, one of the things that has been asked of us is that we are to be in a state known as intidar. It is a state in which we are awaiting the return of the Imam. And here I wanted to mention a hadith. It's a really beautiful hadith on the rank and the status of those that are awaiting their Imam. This hadith is from none other than Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. And the Imam, he begins this hadith, and it has three distinct parts to it. The Imam, he begins the hadith, and he says that the person from amongst you who dies, who passes away, while he is awaiting the return of the Imam. Imagine that you are in a state of awaiting your Imam, you're in a state of intidar, and you don't make it to the time when the Imam has returned. Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says that this individual that was in the state of intidar, he's waiting for the Imam, but he doesn't make it. He has the rank of the person who was with Al-Qa'im in his tent. Now this, it needs a little bit of an explanation. What does it mean that Imam Sadiq is saying that if you are awaiting, you're in the state of intidar, it is as if you are with Imam Mahdi alayhi salam in his tent. When you look at past times, but even today, one of the things that you'll notice is that the generals of an army, the individual with the highest of ranks, usually they had a tent in which they could oversee the entirety of the battlefield. And that was the command center, the nerve center of that army. Everything happened in that place. And even today, you see something similar. When there's a battlefield, usually there's a command post. The individuals that are allowed in this tent, they are none other than the most elite of the soldiers and the commanders of the general. What Imam Sadiq alayhi salam is explaining to us, he is saying that if you are in the state of intidar, then you will have the rank in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as if you are in the same tent, that command tent of Imam Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman. Then the Imam, he pauses, he raises, and he says that no, rather, the rank is going to even be higher than this. He says that rather he would be like a person who was fighting alongside Al-Qa'im with his sword. So the Imam, he says, is actually higher than the one that is in the tent. It is as if you are fighting with Imam Mahdi with your sword. Again, the Imam, he pauses. He says, no, rather, it's even greater than this rank in the eyes of Allah. He says, rather, it is as if there is the one that has attained shahada, alongside Rasulullah. Now, when we see traditions like this, we're wondering to ourselves that how can it be that the state of intidar, the state of awaiting the Imam, it has been described as having such a great rank in the eyes of God? Why is this the case? The ulama, they've said that there is two types of awaiting that is common amongst the people. The first one, and they reject this first type, they say that some people, they await the coming of the Imam in a passive sense. They're just sitting back, they're relaxing, and they're waiting for, inshallah, the Imam to come, and then he's going to fix everything, and he's going to tell us what to do, and he's going to fix the society, all of the issues that we have. Everything is going to be fixed by the hands of the Imam. We're just going to sit and we're going to wait. The scholars, they say this is the incorrect understanding. What is the correct understanding? They say that the one that is actually in the state of intidar, it is the individual that every day he wakes up and he asks himself or herself the question that what can I do to prepare myself for the coming of the Imam? What can I do spiritually? What can I do economically? What can I do physically? Every aspect that you can think of, this individual, he is living his life to prepare for the coming of his Imam. It's very easy to sit back and to say that, inshallah, the Imam will come and I can relax until that time. But the ulama, they say that the way to do it is actually every day that you wake up, you are building that preparation. That if the Imam was to come right now, I would be prepared to join his cause. Now here, let me give an example, inshallah. Hopefully this will bring it to life. Imagine that you have a friend that is leaving on a journey, and he's leaving and he's going to be gone for the next 3 or 4 months. This friend of yours, he calls you and he says that, I'm going to need your help, that tomorrow I have a flight at 4 in the morning. If you'd be so kind, I'm too cheap to take Uber or Lyft. If you would be so kind, please show up at my house at 4 a.m. and inshallah, we will go to the airport together. I'm going to get ready for the journey. And as you know, when you are getting ready for a long journey, for those of you that maybe go to Lebanon in the summers, you're gone for 3 months, 4 months sometimes, you really have to prepare the house. You can't just leave the house as it is. You have to turn on the refrigerator. You have to empty it. You have to shut off the water. You have to pay the bills, maybe tell the neighbor that I'm going to be gone for these months. Please check on the house. There's a number of things that you have to do to get ready for that journey. The following morning, you show up at your friend's house. 4 o'clock on the dot, you're on time. You knock on the door, nobody answers the door. What's going on? Again, you knock on the door, again, nobody answers the door. You call your friend, and you hear a very sleepy sounding voice on the other line. And he suddenly comes to the door, he opens the door, you enter into the house, you look around, you see that nothing is ready. He hasn't packed, he hasn't turned off the water, he hasn't emptied his fridge, he hasn't done a single thing in preparation of this journey. He's not ready for it. And as he runs around trying to fix this and that and do this and that, by the time that he finishes, it's too late to catch the plane. The plane has already left. That state of passive intidar that we were speaking about is exactly this. That for many of us, imagine if the Imam was suddenly to come and he begins to knock on your door. He's knocking on your door. You open the door. He says that, I am Imam Mahdi. You have been calling upon me for an entire lifetime. I'm finally here. Would we look at our Imam and we would say that, Ya Imam, but I'm not ready. I have this and I have that and I've left that half done and I have all of these attachments and I have all these issues that I'm not ready to join your movement. Please, if you could give me a day, a week, a month, maybe a year, I'll be ready to join your movement. Many times when we look at the Muslims, this is the type of intidar that we are living our lives in. Now, one of the things that I wanted to mention tonight is that there are a number of things that can, inshallah, get us ready so that we are from those who are in a state of intidar. Remember that hadith, that high rank that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He gives to those that are in this state. How do we achieve that state? I'm going to mention 2 or 3 points tonight, inshallah. Point number 1 is that when we look at the religion of Islam, one of the most important teachings, and many times we overlook these types of teachings because they are so obvious, is the issue of honesty. That from a very young age, when you were 4 years old, 5 years old, our parents would teach us that as a human being, as a Muslim, one of the most important things is that every time that you speak, you say nothing but the truth. And we tend to downplay these types of teachings. We say it's obvious, it's easy. But how often is it that we don't say the truth? Maybe we twist the truth a little bit. There's a hadith by Imam Jafar as-Sadiq alayhi salam, and this hadith, it's amazing because it goes counter to the way that usually we see other people and we see society. What does the Imam say about this? The Imam, he says that do not be fooled by the prayers and the fasts of the people. Now, usually when we want to see whether a person is a good person, what do? What we do is that we look to see, okay, do they pray? Do they fast? And instantly in our minds, without any further reflection, we classify them as from the good people. Now, this hadith is not minimizing the importance of salah or saum or these other practices. They are the foundations of who we are as Muslims. But the hadith is pointing to another reality, that sometimes a person can pray and they can fast, but the fruits of the praying and the fasting, it hasn't been realized inside of themselves. So the Imam, he continues, he says, do not be fooled by the prayers or the fasts of the people, for people sometimes become used to their prayers and fasts, and if they were to stop, they would feel a sense of unease. For some people, you look at them, they have a beard, they have hijab, they pray, they fast, but inside the fruit of Iman has not been realized. They simply pray and they fast because that is the culture that they were born into. That is what they were taught as children. And if they stop now, they're going to feel a sense of unease. You know, in the same way that maybe we get accustomed to meditation or we have different practices, we do breathing exercises. If we don't do them, we feel uneasy. The Imam, he says that sometimes for some people, fasting and prayer and other acts, they become just like this. It becomes an empty ritual for them. There's no meaning to it. Then the Imam, he answers the question, well, how do you know whether a person is truly living a life of a Muslim? How do we know that those prayers and the fasts, they have actually had effect deep inside? The Imam, he finishes off this hadith. He says, rather, test them by means of their truthfulness and their ability to safeguard the trusts. The Imam is saying something very beautiful. He's saying that if you are praying, if you are engaged in fasting, if you are doing all of these things, then the ability to lie should not be there. Every word that comes out of your mouth is going to be the truth. Why? Because you feel that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching me. If you have that connection that has been established by these actions, then how can you ever lie? And then the second thing is the issue of amana, that if someone comes to you and they give you an amount of money, an amount of wealth, something that they say, look, I don't have access to a bank. Here is this amount of money. Please safeguard it for me. Would you be trustworthy that no matter how much time passes, even if no one knows about this, you are so truthful and so honest that you will return that money back to them? And by the way, one of the things that I love to do with myself is I play a mind game and I ask myself this question. I say that imagine someone, he comes and he says that I have an amana to give to you. He gives me, for example, $500. Imagine that someone has approached you and they give you $500 that they say after 2-3 months, I'm going to come, I'm going to need it back. Please return it back to me. No one knows about this. If we ask ourselves this question, that would we return the $500? I think most of us, we would agree that $500 is not worth stealing from someone, especially with the inflation that is happening today. It's not enough. But if you begin to up that amount, Imagine that it was $2,000. No one knows. Even here, I think most of us would say that even $2,000 is not worth it. But if you continue to up the price, 50,000, 500,000, $5 million, $50 million, $5 billion, is there ever a point in which you would say, you know what, I would probably take the money and I wouldn't give it? This shows a weakness in Iman, that if we really believe that there is a day of judgment, if we really believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching everything that we are doing, then we can never do such a thing. So Imam Sadiq, he says this issue of honesty, it is paramount. That if you are praying, if you are fasting, it should have this effect, that whenever you speak, you say the truth, and whenever there is the issue of amana, you always return the trusts back to the people. You know, it never ceases to amaze me. The story of Laylatul Mabit, you know, the night when we look and we see that Amirul Mu'mineen alayhi salam, he was asked to sleep in the bed of the Holy Prophet. And Rasulullah, he uses that night to leave the city of Mecca and he immigrates to the city of Medina. You know, one of the instructions that Rasulullah, he gives to Amirul Mu'mineen. Just imagine the situation that they are in. They are about to be assassinated. The enemies have surrounded the house of Rasulullah. The situation is so dire that he has to escape, and even when he escapes, they follow him and they try to catch him. One of the instructions that Rasulullah, he gives to Amirul Mu'mineen, he says that, Ya Ali, these people, the people of Mecca, they have given me many of their amanas. Meaning that whenever the people of Mecca, the polytheists, the ones that were trying to kill Rasulullah, whenever they had an amount of money and they needed someone that they could trust to leave it with them, would they go to Abu Sufyan? They wouldn't go to Abu Sufyan. Would they go to Abu Lahab? They wouldn't go to Abu Lahab. They would go to Rasulullah, in spite of the fact that they are calling him a magician and a liar, and they are even trying to assassinate him. If it was us and we were in that situation, we would say, forget about these people. They've persecuted us, they've hurt us, they've called us names, they've done all of these things, and now they want their money back? I'm going to take this, I'm going to enjoy my time in Medina. Rasulullah, he says, no, this is of the utmost importance. Now, when we're speaking about the issue of honesty, there is something else that is related that we almost never speak about. And I think most of our parents, even though they taught us about honesty with others, they didn't teach us about this. And this issue is almost as important as honesty with others. And this is none other than being honest with ourselves. And this is probably even more difficult than when you're dealing with other people, you're honest with them. This is more difficult to be honest with ourselves. In the sense that when I look at myself deep inside, am I able to really see who I am, and I'm able to see my strengths and my weaknesses? One of the problems that we sometimes have is that when we look at ourselves, we overestimate our abilities and our religiosity. It's very easy for us to do. You know, there's a famous story of a scholar, and Shahid Motahari, he mentions the story of this scholar in one of his books. He says that there was a scholar one time that after many years of serving the cause of Islam, one night, and it might have been one of the nights of the month of Muharram or maybe the month of Safar, he was actually reading the story of the companions of Imam Hussein. And as he was reading about the sacrifice of the Imam and his companions, he began to think to himself that if I had been there with my Imam, of course, after all of these years of serving Islam, and I'm very courageous and brave, and I'm knowledgeable, and I have all of these good characteristics, I would have definitely been one of the companions of the Imam. In fact, these companions that are with the Imam, there's nothing special about them. He says, that night, I went to sleep. He went to sleep, and when he suddenly comes to, he realizes that he's having a dream. And in that dream, he is on the plains of Karbala. He looks around and he sees that he is surrounded by 30,000 of the enemy forces. He looks up at the sky. He sees that it is the time of Dhuhr. It's the time of Salah, and the Imam alayhi salam is there, and he is getting ready to begin his prayers. You know the story, there's a famous story that on the day of Ashura, when the Imam, he began to pray, two of the companions, they went in front of the Imam in order to protect the Imam from the arrows of the enemy forces. The enemies would try to shoot arrows towards the Imam whenever he was stationary. And these companions, one of them, by the end of the salah, when the Imam finishes the prayer, it's only been a few minutes, he was stuck with all of these arrows from the enemy, and he ends up falling on the ground and he passes away. He says that I saw myself and it seemed as if I was supposed to protect the Imam while he begins his salah. He says, I stood in front of the Imam. The Imam, he begins his prayer. He says, Allahu Akbar. The salah has begun. And as I'm looking around, it's frightening. You see 30,000 enemies that are surrounding you. He says, I'm looking around. I looked at one of the enemies and I see that he begins to pick up his bow. He picks up his bow. He notches an arrow. He begins to pull back on the string, and suddenly he releases the arrow directly at me, and the Imam is standing right behind me. He says, I was determined that I'm going to stand and I'm going to absorb that arrow with my body. I'm not going to allow any of that arrow to strike the body of my Imam. He says, as the arrow begins to travel through the air, I see it is coming towards me, it's coming closer. He says, no matter how much I tried, I wasn't able to stand there. I moved my body and I heard the arrow strike the body of my Imam. He says that I saw another enemy. He begins to pull back on his bow. And this time I told myself that for sure this time I'm going to prevent the arrow from striking the body of my Imam. He says, I stood there and I see the arrow traveling through the air. It's coming, it's coming. And in my mind, I can imagine the pain. I can imagine it striking me, piercing my body. He says, no matter how much I tried, I couldn't help myself. I moved out of the way, and again, I heard the arrow strike the body of my Imam. He says it was at that moment that I woke up. I woke up and I realized that that conception that I had of myself, the person who I thought I was, the qualities that I thought I had, he says that I realized that I didn't have these qualities. I needed to work on myself. This may be our story, my brothers and sisters, that we have certain ideas about who we are, that we are going to be with our Imams. But if we are not willing to put in that work every single day, that struggle of growing, of progressing, of learning, then it is certain that we are going to have the position that when the time comes, we are going to fail our Imam. The people of Kufa, this was their exact situation, that when they were calling upon their Imam, just like we sometimes call upon our Imam, they didn't think to themselves that when the Imam comes and when the situation becomes severe, that somehow we are going to fall away and not protect our Imam. This is something that on these nights of Muharram we should really reflect about. The second point is the issue of humility. When we look at ourselves, one of the most important qualities of the believer that one can have is the quality of a humble heart. And one of the things that we went over on one of the earlier nights is that when you look at Shaitan, what was one of his main vices? One of his main vices and defects was that he had allowed arrogance to grow within his heart. There's a really beautiful hadith from Imam Qadim alayhi salam. He says the following, he says plants, if you want to see where a plant can grow, he says plants, they grow on soft soil and not on stones. Similarly, knowledge and wisdom, they sprout only in a humble heart and not in a heart that is filled with arrogance. If we see ourselves that we have arrogance within ourselves, then one of the issues is that when we try to look deep within to see who am I, what are the qualities that I have? What are the characteristics that I have? We're not going to be able to accurately measure who we actually are. Inshallah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He grants us this heart that is full of humility. The third issue, and this is also extremely important, is that if you look at 1400 years ago and you compare it with the time of today, sometimes we're going to wonder that well, how do I actually know that if the Imam is to rise today, how would I know that I would join him, that I would be one of those that are from his companions? One of the answers and one of the ways that we can measure our readiness is to look and see where we stand in relation to injustice. It's very easy for me to look at 1400 years ago and to say that I would have stood against the injustice of that time. It's a theoretical injustice. But today, in the year 2024, am I actually standing against the injustices that I see happening around me? One of the very easy issues that we can look at is the issue of Palestine. That it's easy for us, just like that third group that we were talking about, that they see that there's a little bit of risk. They have love for the people. They don't want the Imam, for example, to be killed. They don't want the people of Palestine to be massacred. But they recognize that there's a little bit of risk. I might lose my job. This might happen. That might happen. And so it's very easy for us to say that I'm going to remain quiet today. I'm going to sit this one out. And so that's one of the questions that we should be asking ourselves, that in relation to the issue of injustice, are we on the forefronts? And when we look at the jobs that we have, I can't tell you of how many Shias that I know, especially in California, the place that I come from. There's many jobs that are related to the so-called defense industries. There's so many Shias that when the majalis of Imam Hussein alayhi salam, when the time comes, they attend those majalis and they weep over the tragedy of Karbala. But when the sun rises, they get in their cars, they drive to work, and they help to build the weaponry. They help to build the technology, which then goes on to oppress the people around the world, to maim innocent men, women, and children. This is a reality. We have to look at the kinds of jobs that we have. Are they jobs that support dhulm? Because if my income, if my entire livelihood, if the house that I'm living in, the car that I'm driving with, the clothes that I have, if all of these things, it comes and it is a product of dhulm, do we really think that when the Imam suddenly comes, I'm going to put all of that aside, a lifetime of banking on dhulm, and I'm going to suddenly be with the Imam, I'm going to leave all of that aside? That's not how it works. So we have to look at our everyday lives, that this life that I am leading, am I on the cutting edge of fighting against the oppressors? Here, I wanted to mention a really beautiful story, and it shows how much the Ahlul Bayt were concerned about the support of oppressors. Sometimes it's easy for us to kind of close our eyes and imagine that it's not that big of a deal, but for the Ahlul Bayt, they saw the reality of dhulm. There was a companion of one of the Imams by the name of Safwan ibn Mihran. And Safwan, there's an interesting history with him, that he was the companion of two members of the Ahlul Bayt. He was the companion of not only Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, but also Imam Qadim. And during the time of Imam Qadim, it's narrated that Safwan, he was a very wealthy individual. And his wealth, it came about because he had a large herd of camels. During that time period, if you wanted to go on any trip, you needed to have a herd of camels. So you could put your family members, you could put luggage, you could put food items. These camels would carry everything for long distances. Safwan, he had been able to accumulate a great deal of wealth, and he had this large herd of camels, and he would essentially rent out the camels to different parties. One day, Safwan is sitting with Imam Qadim alayhi salam. And as he's sitting with the Imam turns to him, he says, Ya Safwan, all of your actions are beautiful except one thing that you are doing. Safwan, he turns to the Imam, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, please tell me. I would like to know what I'm doing wrong. The Imam, he turns to Safwan, he says, Safwan, I have heard that you have rented out your herd of camels to Harun, the Khalif. He says, Ibn Rasulullah, I've done this, but it was for a good cause. Harun, he's actually planning on going to the Hajj pilgrimage this year. And so for the Hajj pilgrimage, he needed a large caravan of camels. And I agreed that I'm going to give him my camel so he can go perform this act of ibadah, this great act of worship. The Imam, he turns to Safwan. He says, oh, Safwan, is it possible that when you rent out this herd of camels to Harun, and Harun, he leaves with your herd of camels, is it possible that deep within your heart, you're going to have this little hope, that you're hoping that Harun can remain alive until he comes back with your herd of camels and he can at least pay you your wages? During that time, if the Khalif, he goes on the Hajj pilgrimage, he ends up dying for any reason, you can say goodbye to that herd of camels. Every individual will come and take it, and you can forget about getting paid as well. Safwan, he begins to reflect. He begins to look deep within himself. He begins to analyze his motivations for what he is doing. And he looks at Imam Qadam alayhi salam. He says, Ibn Rasulullah, I looked deep within myself and I do have that hope, that I hope that this oppressor, this tyrant, he remains alive for at least a few days until he can go to the Hajj pilgrimage and he can return the camels and he can pay me my wages. The Imam, he looks at him and he says that this is a type of support of the tyrants. You have hope in your heart that they're remaining alive and they can continue to oppress and to kill and to do the things that they do. You know what Safwan does? Safwan, he goes, he gets rid of his entire herd of camels. He sells them. And then he sends a letter to Harun. He says, oh Harun, unfortunately, I've sold my camels and I'm not able to hire them out anymore. I'm not able to rent them to you anymore. Harun, he summons Safwan because he knows there's a situation here, that this individual, he wouldn't just sell his camels like this randomly. He calls upon Safwan and he says, oh Safwan, I know why you did this. It is none other than Imam Qadam. He is the one that convinced you to do this action. And then he says to him that if it was not for the fact that we have an old friendship, we have known each other for many years, I would have beheaded you right here and right now. My brothers and sisters, the stances that we are taking on oppression, the stance that we have taken today, it is one of the greatest indicators of the stance that we are going to take when Imam Sahib al-Asri was Zaman, he returns and he asks us to join him. Inshallah, we ask that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he blesses us, he forgives us, and he allows us to stand steadfast on the path of Imam Hussein and the Ahlul Bayt. I want to just mention that this is the final night of our program together. I wanted to thank everyone, as well as the organization, the Ashura Project, for extending the invitation. It was truly an honor to be here amongst you. I also ask forgiveness for any shortcomings on my end. And I just wanted to mention a point that when we have these kinds of programs, it's very easy to see the speakers, they're very visible. But behind the scenes, for every program like this, there are so many people, countless dozens of individuals that they leave work early so that they can set up, and they stay long after we've all gone home. They're organizing. And so these individuals are really the backbone. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them, and may He continue to give them tawfiq of doing what they have been doing. Inshallah, on their behalf, let us recite aloud salawat. Allahumma
رحم الله من أعاد الصلاة على محمد وآل محمد. Brothers and sisters, lovers of Aba Abdullah al-Hussein, سماحة السيد, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. On this difficult night, a night that's difficult upon the heart of Imam صاحب العصر والزمان, the heart of the Imam al-Mahdi, أرواحنا فداه. They call this the night of farewell. This is the night before we recite the great tragedy and before the greatest tragedy in Islam happens. And so, with our hearts, inshallah, let's transcend to Karbala so we may comfort the heart of Sayyida Fatima and Sahib al-Asri wal-Zaman. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى آلك المظلومين. صلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة. May the peace of Allah be upon the benevolent heart of Imam Hussein. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, as you are His vast mercy and the salvation of this ummah. Together. A stranger you were in Karbala, yeah. Thirsty you were in Karbala, yeah. Martyred you fell in Karbala, yeah. May the peace of Allah be upon you, Aba Abdullah, and upon your infant child, Abdullah al-Radi. Yalla, this is the night of sorrow. Speak, O night of sorrow, of tears and hearts in woe. Do tell in a land cast afar how Hussein under the stars gazed upon his daughters, kind of heart, duckled in manners. How shall they fare when he will fall? يعني Hani, Sukaina, Ruqayya, Fatima, the daughters of Muslim ibn Aqil, the daughters of the Ashab and his family members. How shall they fare when he will fall? When the tents burn, who will they call? Hussein, Akbar, Qasim, over the sand faded, and the companions lay from their wounds jaded. How shall they run between burning tents? How shall they hide from bashing belts? Their call will be faint and sad. Hussein, don't leave, take our hand. When no answer comes, only echo returns. Perhaps they will look towards the river's banks and call his name one last time. Perhaps his hands can still carry a sword. Perhaps he'll bring water one more time. Abbas, Abbas, near the Euphrates lay, thirsty near the water slain. Al-Imam al-Rida alayhi salam said, إن يوم الحسين أقرح جفوننا وأسبل دموعنا وأذل عزيزنا بأرض كرب وبلاء فعلى الحسين فليبكي الباكون. He says, Imam al-Rida, the day of Hussein has pained our eyes, shed our tears, and brought great calamity upon our loved one in a land of karb and bala, calamity and hardship, and has committed us to distress and affliction until the end of days. So, for Hussein, let the weepers weep, for weeping over Hussein wipes away the greatest of sins. And tonight, brothers and sisters, the heart of our 12th Imam prepares for the great tragedy that will befall his grandfather tomorrow. And tonight, with Sahib al-Zaman, we too should prepare our hearts for the tragedy of Hussein. Habibi ya Hussein, Habibi ya Hussein. In Karbala, many were killed with Aba Abdullah. Young boys, youthful boys, young teens, young youth, men, elderly men. And they were all the heroes of Karbala. But there is also another hero in Karbala, named Abdullah al-Radi', Abdullah, the infant of Imam Hussein. He was 6 months old when he was in Karbala with his father and mother. On the 10th day, after all the companions had been killed and all the family members were martyred, and only Imam Hussein alayhi salam remained. Imam Hussein alayhi salam stood in that desert and called out, "Ala hal min nasirin yansuruna, ala hal min mu'inin yu'inuna." Is there no one that will come and support us and stand with us? No one answered his call, and the time for the Imam to enter the battlefield came. So he goes to bid farewell to his daughters and sisters. They held on to the Imam, crying, weeping over him. They do not want him to leave them. They do not want him to go to his fate. Then after he bid them farewell, he walks outside of the tent, and before mounting his horse, he calls his sister Zaynab. There's one more person in Karbala the Imam wants to bid farewell to. Ya Zaynab, bring me my baby Abdullah. I want to embrace him one last time. Hussein said, before my last fight, Ya Zaynab, I long to hold my infant tight. Let me feel his calming touch. Let me see his lips in Karbala, chapped ever so much. Sayyida Zaynab, she brings Abdullah and she gives him to his father. But how was the baby? For the past 2 days, his mother had not had any water and barely any food, so he was extremely dehydrated and malnutritioned. In addition, they had been stranded in a scorching desert with little protection from heat and from the sun, and the baby was unconscious from these severe conditions. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, he takes his baby, he begins to kiss him. As he's embracing his baby in his arms, some of the enemies, they see the Imam, and an argument breaks out. Some say, why are we not giving water to this baby? Others say, we will not give a single drop to anyone from that household. And the argument grows. Umar ibn Sa'ad notices what's happening, and he doesn't want it to get bigger than it is. So he calls to who? He calls to Harmala, his best archer. He says, Ya Harmala, iqta' niza' al-qawm. Ya Harmala, end this argument. Harmala says, I took a tri-bladed arrow, yani an arrowhead that has 3 blades. I looked at Imam Hussein's baby, and his neck became uncovered in the wind. So I aimed my arrow and shot the baby in the throat. Ya Habibi, حرملا منك حرمني يا حبيبي من قبل ذبحك ذبحني. Harmala's arrow without any care wounded Hussein in a pain too great to bear. The baby died and Hussein echoed in despair. Abdullah, they killed you in my arms without care.
A narration says that when Abdullah al-Radi' felt the pain and the heat from the arrow, he awakened in agony. He fluttered like a butchered dove in his father's arms. He grabbed onto his father Hussein, bleeding over his hands until he quickly passed away. رحم الله من نادى ورضيعا وعبد الله. Imam Hussein alayhi salam, imagine his condition in that moment, in that pain. He takes his hand, he fills his palm with the blood of his baby Abdullah al-Radi', and he throws it to the sky, saying, هَوَّنَ مَا نَزَلَ بِي أَنَّهُ بِعَيْنِ اللَّهِ. I remain patient over the calamity as it's in the eyes of Allah. A narration from Imam al-Baqir says that when the Imam threw his baby's blood, not a single drop came back down, and he heard a caller saying, worry not, Ya Hussein, for there is someone in paradise who will care for Abdullah. Babies cry, laugh and play, but Hussein's baby in the heat swayed, a gentle face burnt by the sun, lips chapped and no water runs. And as Hussein held him near and close, an arrow came swift with woes. Hussein patiently shed tear after tear. My baby butchered in my arms here. Ya Rabbi, my baby in my arms has died without sin, and for Abdullah he cried. What does the Imam do? What does the Imam do? He takes his baby Abdullah, he calls over his sister Zaynab. He says, Zaynab, come here, and he gave her the butchered baby. And he tells her, Ya Zaynab, try and hide the baby from his mother so it does not break his heart. Yes, that day in Karbala was filled with harrowing sorrow. The day of the 10th of Muharram was filled with great sorrow. But the night before the 10th day, that night was also very difficult. Sayyida Zaynab saw her brother Hussein talking to his companions and preparing them, bidding farewell to his daughters and family members. Then he came and he sat with her. He spoke with her and prepared her for the tragedy. He reminded her of the virtue of patience and the great value of her role, and he gently consoled her pain. But may God help the heart of Zaynab, the mother of calamities. How did she feel that night as she awaits the coming morning when Imam Hussein and all those noble men will be killed? What will happen to the women and children? How will she be able to deal with all of these difficulties without her brothers Hussein and Abbas, without her nephews Qasim and Ali al-Akbar, and without her sons? The poet paints a picture as if Sayyida Zaynab did not want the morning light to come, as if she spoke to the night sky, pleading with it not to allow the morning sun to rise. Ya Lail Tawil Sa'atak, Ya Lail Ahmil Ahatak, Ya Lail Tawil Sa'atak. ساعتك يا ليل أحمل آهاتك under the night sky. Yalla, let's try to imagine Sayyida Zaynab in these final hours in the dark of night. Zaynab would say, with lips chapped and despair in the land, Hussein, my brother, must we stay? Hussein, tomorrow the children will cry and no longer play, but I will remain when your soul soars away. Hussein, she spoke to the night with every beat of her heart, with every speck of her might. Oh night, stay dark, don't become bright. Oh night, remain, don't allow the morning light. Ya Lail, طول ساعاتك يا ليل أحمل آهاتك لو ودعت الوليان تتولاني العدوان. One more scene to imagine, huh? Then Zaynab walked over to Abbas and sat by his side, and for long she cried, Abbas, you swore to be my guide, you swore to guard my side, Abbas. Tomorrow the children for water will cry, and from thirst I fear they will all die. Tell me, brother, on whom must they rely? Abbas, she spoke to the night with every beat of her heart and every speck of her might. Oh night, stay dark, don't become bright. Ya Lail, طول ساعاتك يا ليل أحمل آهاتك لو ودعت الوليان تتولاني العدوان. السلام على عبد الله الرضيع المرمي الصريع المتشحط دمان والمصعد بدمه إلى السماء. Ya Allah, Ya Allah, we ask and call upon you by your greatest name, the mightiest, the most honorable, to send your blessings and praise upon Muhammad and the family of Muhammad, and that you accept of us our worship. We ask you to send your mercy upon the dead of the believing men and women. We ask you by Hussein the martyr and his mother and father, brothers and sisters, in these gatherings, inshaAllah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the barakah of Ahl al-Bayt and the barakah of Imam Hussein, and the barakah of the tear that we shed for the Imam. If you have a need, inshallah, the doors of mercy are open. So if you have a need, take advantage and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to help you with your needs. Ya Allah, we ask you by Hussein the martyr and his mother and father and brother, whoever was in this gathering of ours and has a need, that you fulfill it for them. In particular, those who have requested that we do dua on their behalf. We ask you, whoever in this gathering of ours and is sick or has a sick family member or loved one, that you heal them and cure their ailments. We pray that you relieve the suffering of all those oppressed, especially the people of Palestine. We ask you to tackle the innocent martyrs of Gaza and Lebanon and Iraq and Yemen with your victory and to heal the wounds, with your mercy, and to heal the wounds of its survivors. And we pray that you bring your aid and victory upon those fighting against Israeli evil, and that you bring about the defeat of this cancerous Israeli Zionist entity, and that you hasten the return of our beloved 12th Imam, Al-Imam Al-Mahdi, and that you write our names amongst his supporters and aiders. We ask that you protect our scholars and maraja'. Assalamu ala al-Hussein. Yalla, together, I need help. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein. السلام على أبي الفضل العباس أخي الحسين. السلام على الحوراء زينب أخت الحسين. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى جدك المصطفى وأبيك المرتضى وأمك الزهراء وأخيك المجتبى والتسعة المعصومين من بنيك النجبا. السلام عليك وعلى حفيدك الطالب بثارك المهدي المنتظر. اللهم كن لوليك في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة من القلب وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا. تمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وإلى أرواح الشهداء والعلماء ومن مات على ولاية مولانا علي بن أبي طالب، لا سيما أرواح أمواتنا جميعا، ولقضاء الحوائج وتعجيل الظهور. رحم الله من قرأ الفاتحة مسبوقة بالصلاة على محمد وآل محمد بأعلى الأصوات.
بسم الله. Bismillah. 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 1.